I'm not entirely sure how I feel about We're on the Road to Delaware. This is the 11th episode of the 17th season of The Simpsons, directed by David Silverman and Nancy Kruse. And what I will say is I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was a terrible episode. And there were definitely bits in it that I liked. But I just feel like there was too much going on that nothing really had enough time to develop properly. There was some information about Homer and Bart's relationship, which I think went somewhere, but didn't fully develop the way it could have done. And Marge's story, which I'll talk about in a moment, it just, I don't know, it kind of fell a bit flat. And then the way it ended, I actually found the ending to be quite amusing, but I feel like it was a bit of a cop-out. And there were at least 2 times when the pacing was terrible. So, yeah, there were bits that I liked, but overall it's not the best narrative. Homer is supposed to be going to Vegas, but instead he's got to drive Bart to this camp where he's going to learn to behave properly because he does something with Milhouse at school and it causes a lot of problems. And honestly, the way that unfolded, I won't say exactly what he did, but the way that unfolded, I feel like it was really slow. It took a long time to get anywhere. They could have quickened that up a bit. It wasn't really that interesting. And Homer is supposed to take Bart to the airport so he can fly to Oregon. We learn in this episode that The Simpsons is set in neither Oregon nor Massachusetts, and it's definitely pronounced Groning, because Matt Groening's name is mentioned. He was from Oregon, and Homer said Groning. So to answer the question if is it Groening or Groning, according to this episode, Matt Groening. But Bart's on the no-fly list. Homer has to drive him instead, and Bart does everything he can to try and not get there. And I'll talk to the camp. And I'll talk more about that with a spoiler warning in a moment. Meanwhile, Marge and Lisa are having a yard sale, and Marge starts to sell Homer's expired prescription medication. And she realizes she can actually get quite a bit of money for it. And that seems like it could be quite an interesting narrative. And I guess I'll discuss things with spoiler warning now, so spoilers from now. I'll discuss the 2 points where I thought the pacing was really bad, one of which is a bit of a spoiler, and then I'll discuss what happens with Marge and also with Homer, and how I think everything just kind of fell flat. So spoilers, honestly the Homer and Bart story, they had some nice father-son moments, but that part of the narrative just kind of went nowhere. Bart at the camp, yeah, it was quite interesting, and what Homer did, again, relatively interesting. But I feel like the narrative then started to go elsewhere, and it didn't work for me. Marge's story, I didn't mind, but it could have been more. It could have been so much more interesting, and it just ended up being nothing. And ultimately what happened to her meant that it was just Lisa and Maggie, which I thought was a pretty funny ending. But at the same time, Marge's story should have been the main narrative, because I feel like we could have got a lot deeper into that and it could have been quite fascinating. But again, it felt like they weren't really sure what to do with the story, so they just did a half-arsed attempt at it. 2 bits where I thought the pacing was terrible, which kind of made me think they didn't have enough substance, enough within the narrative to really sustain itself. But again, they could have used that time to do something with Marge's story. But the first, I actually loved it when Flanders bought back the Joseph vinyl and he started singing the song, and I really enjoyed that. But it did go on for way longer than it should have done. And also the bit on the cliff where the car's hanging off the cliff, that bit went on for probably double the length of time I feel like it should have done. That wore thin pretty quickly as well. So the pacing just wasn't very good. And that with the opening of Bart wrecking the school, that went on for far too long. Marge's story not really evolving into anything or being that fascinating. The pacing was just terrible. And the narratives just didn't feel fully fleshed out. It feels like an incomplete episode. It feels like the first draft of a script. And there are little bits here and there that I liked. But generally, I have to say, it's not the best written episode.